So are you hungry? The Gospel of John talks about bread, now on the Accessible Faith Project. Hi there, I'm John and welcome to the Accessible Faith Project. If you're new here and looking for insights into the Bible, faith and history in ways that engage your brain, then please hit subscribe and the little bell icon so you receive a notification every time I upload a new video. Our time of social distancing seems to be drawing to a close, but I've still been using the Accessible Faith Project to provide worship and devotional resources in addition to my educational videos. This is a sermon, but as with all of my offerings, I hope that setting things in context can help us in ours. I have to wonder, have any of you gotten just a little bit hungry when listening to the Gospel of John? Well, maybe in certain sections of it, all this talk of bread might get your mouth watering. Perhaps you've something ready to go in the oven for Sunday dinner. I mean, chances are I've already started your stomachs growling for your next meal, which makes it particularly challenging to preach because now all anybody is thinking about is food. And it's not exactly easy to preach when the whole congregation is thinking about their next meal. But I'm going to give it a try. Truth is, you can actually grab a snack. Go ahead. It seems that a good number of the early stories in John's Gospel center around food. We have the wedding at Cana, the feeding of the multitude, his conversations about the living water with the Samaritan woman, and the well-known statement, "I am the bread of life." The Gospel of John opens up with a question, are you hungry? And it stirs up the pot and really pours on the gravy with food metaphors. Of course, John seems to be talking about a spiritual food that nourishes and sustains beyond our physical needs. Still, he begins with something that everyone is familiar with, that sensation of hunger and how much that want and genuine need for food parallel our need for God. For John, this would be when everyone would be familiar with the sensation of hunger because everyone knew what famine was at some point or another. So John tapped into that sense of longing that people knew well and brought it alongside that sense of spiritual hunger that was particularly widespread in the first century. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Now, as a 21st century North American audience, we relate to food very well, but a genuine sense of hunger is something we honestly don't know in a culture of supersized fast food. If anything, our challenge is we live in a culture that has an overabundance of food. Although a constant barrage of media reports tells us that American society is collectively overweight, and Canada is not far behind, and yours truly included. I remember listening to a special on CBC once that the only way for food companies to profit in a food-abundant culture is to get people to eat more. So up go the portion sizes. And we sort of know what being hungry is as we look ahead to our next meal, but we don't know what it feels like to starve. And so these words are a little unfamiliar. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. The scene comes after the feeding of the 5,000, yet as John tells it, at least a day had passed, and the crowds came looking for Jesus again. And while Jesus fed them one day, they were hungry again and went looking for Jesus again. And when they find him, Jesus offers them something different. A relationship with God, something that will sustain them beyond their mortal lives. In other words, the bread of life. John uses the metaphor of food to talk about our relationship with God, yet the people don't seem to get it, and they don't follow the play on words. Instead, they think Jesus is talking about some sort of perpetual real bread that will physically fill them up and they will never have to eat them again. Now, of all the Gospels, John makes the most effective use of the metaphor when talking about Jesus. Most often, we hear this through the famous I am statements. There's 7 of them. Jesus says I am on several occasions in John's Gospel, 7 of them as a theological anchor point, metaphors that give us a powerful insight into what the early church understood about Jesus. In each case, when they appear, John has Jesus go into these long, heady, and rather esoteric discussions about what that I am metaphor means. The trouble is, for the most part, we just don't get it. Yet in the most simple of terms, Jesus says, I am bread, feed on me. And I can't remember where I saw it, but I once saw a picture of a communion wafer with the words, eat me, underneath it. It may have been a bit crude perhaps, but it does point us in the right direction. This story is at its absolute best when preached on the same Sundays that we celebrate communion. John is very clearly layering the image of the Lord's Supper into this passage, eating the bread and drinking the cup. And by doing so, we bring Jesus so close to us that he is inside us, changing us and calling us into a relationship with one another. In other words, the bread that Jesus offers is the bread that nourishes the soul. Jesus presents himself. I am bread, feed on me. Come and live in relationship with me, and the spiritual hunger you have will be satisfied. I think in some ways, we would have preferred it if Jesus had said to the crowd, now that you're eaten your fill on my miraculous bread, let me give you a lecture on the essential beliefs of the Christian faith. The trouble is, Jesus doesn't do that. Instead, he says, eat me, feed on me, take me in the same way you would eat a good meal, and come together and eat. And in its early days, communion was part of a shared meal. The faith community ate together as part of their worship services, and we have made it far more formal over the years, and yet we still gather around food, at least before the pandemic. Church potlucks were, and hopefully still are, a way of life. And we would get together and eat. Inside and outside the church, we build friendships over meals. And why would we think it any different with our relationship with God? It's not enough to simply believe some ideas about Jesus. God calls us into a relationship with him. I am bread, feed on me. I will be inside you and I will nourish your soul. It is that very intimate, earthy, fleshy sort of metaphor. Jesus is more than just an exciting idea, more than a belief. He is the bread that we hunger for, to eat, to savor, that satisfies us. We bring him into our lives in a personal and intimate way that feeds our spiritual hunger. And this is life-changing stuff. Yet there is something that scares us here. Like those who grumble in the story, we actually don't get it. I think we would prefer it if Jesus were just an interesting idea. As much as I'd like to think of myself as the academic type, I love delving into stuff, researching and learning. I wouldn't have started this channel if I didn't. I enjoy sharing what I've learned with others, which is why I enjoy the style of Bible studies that I do. Yet, I've also learned that most people do not come to faith by long-winded arguments and reason. Instead, it's the personal contact and the friendship is what most often brings people to faith. And from my own experiences, I know this is true. And as much as I enjoy study, it is in those personal encounters with one another that we encounter Jesus in our midst. I remember a conversation I once had with a national staff member of the United Methodist Church in the United States. I was part of a group that was developing a website that would have appeal to and genuinely nurture faith in those who were solidly postmodern in their thinking. Now, he was a dyed-in-the-wool Methodist, but he had come to it honestly. And he told me one of the things that turned him off Baptist or even Presbyterian denominations, of which I was part of at the time, is that all a believer needed was, quote, intellectual assent to correct doctrine. Those were his words, not mine. His experience went like this. If you get all the facts right, that's all you need and nothing else changes. And while I assured him that my own experience was quite different, I think in some respects he's right. What attracted him to Methodism was that sense of personal relationship, an intimate relationship that inspired and developed genuine change in oneself and in the community around them. John reminds us that the Christian faith is more than just a set of beliefs or intellectual propositions. It is a matter of Jesus encountering us, a matter of God getting personal with us, engaging our lives in a far more intimate way than we realize. In the early church, we know that the celebrations that would develop into what we now call communion were congregational meals. There wasn't a difference between the two at one point in our history. They were exactly the same thing. Relationships are built over meals. In some ways, it's something we already know deep down, but we often need a reminder. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. So remember this whenever you get together around the table with your friends, whenever you go out for food with one another, whenever you share and develop your friendships. In the same way, take the opportunity to build your relationship with God, and that spiritual hunger will be satisfied. Amen.